I think is good to start is just the basics around boundaries, because a lot of the questions that came in for me were like, what's the difference between a boundary and an expectation and a limit? And how do I know if my boundaries are too rigid versus too porous? So just to get everyone on the same page, because this word boundary can mean different for different people. And I'd love to hear what's your definition of boundaries?
My definition of boundaries includes safety measures for yourself, for your relationships, and for others. I think of boundaries as like a traffic light. This is okay. You're getting a little warm and stop, right? So we're letting people know where we stand in our relationships with them with our boundaries. And sometimes those are expectations. They are making requests. It is certainly changing our behaviors and being verbal about our needs. Before I wrote this book, I did not use the B word much. I would just say things like, what do you plan to tell them? And that was my way of getting people to say, what is your boundary? Right? Because we don't necessarily have to use the word to describe the concept we're talking about here. So, hopefully, with the workbook, people are starting to understand that all of these things are boundaries. And I don't have to go around saying, you're disrespecting my boundary, but I can say you're not being kind to me in my house because I asked you not to raise your voice when we're disagreeing.
Yes. So even that word boundary, some people it may feel off-putting because they think of boundaries as something that's like putting a wall up, as opposed to what you're describing is it's a little bit more fluid of what's green for you, what's yellow for you, what's red for you. And it's also very personal, that
Hmm.
it's defined by you, by your experience, and not everyone's quote boundary is going to be the same.
Absolutely. I often get, what boundary can I set with? And I'm like, I don't know, because it's so based on your comfort level. My boundaries would be different. I don't have an issue telling someone, no, I can't do that. If you have an issue making that statement to someone, then we have to explore other things. So it may not be whatever I can do, you can do. It needs to be something particular to you and what you can actually say. We're often talking about scripts, and scripts are really just to give you an idea. I want you to freestyle. I want you to think of how you would say this using the terminology that you typically use, using your own inflections and all of that stuff. Please don't say it exactly like me. That's my way of saying it. How would you say this thing to another person?
Sometimes, though, scripts are helpful because what I noticed, some of your scripts in your workbook are things like these STEM statements of saying, I expect, I
Mhm.
need, I want. And what I tend to do is I put in a lot of filler words before the I expect, like filler words like maybe, sort of, kind of, if you don't mind, sort of these softeners that actually weaken my boundary. And so I feel like hearing you say it so directly without the filler words and without the wiggle room that we often put in
Mhm.
place strengthens the message. And some of us need to work on that. Some of us also need to work on putting maybe a little more filler word in to like soften the message, because we come off so strong that it's abrasive. So how do you navigate that sort of the when to soften versus when to strengthen the boundary?
Softening and strengthening is really based on the person you're speaking to. If we really consider the people in our lives, and some people, we know how they take information. They've told us before, wow, that was harsh. That really upset me. Those are the people who you need a softer approach with. The people who seem to be able to handle it, I think you can give it to them straight. So you really have to think about the people in your life,
Mm.
because everybody does not need the same thing. Relationships are so unique and catered to the people in them. I've been in situations where people will say, um, I'm so sorry for being late. I'm like, actually, thank you. I was able to, finish watching my TV show on my phone. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, you don't have to apologize to me. Perhaps there are other people who really dislike this behavior. It is not me. So it's important to remember that everything is not a problem for everyone. It will be a problem for some people, but not every single person. And you can be as kind as you want to be and set a boundary, and people can still perceive it as harsh, even with all of the I love you. I need to say this. It's really hard for me. Please don't be upset at me. I hope you can hear this and receive all of those things you could say, and people will still say, that was so mean.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think getting a boundary set on us can be uncomfortable even if we know the boundary is healthy. So, for example, my team, I work with a team and we do our best to communicate clearly with one another. And I had a boundary set on me by one of my team members where I was changing things last minute. I'm a last minute changer kind of person. And my team member just said, Diana, when you change things last minute, it makes it really difficult for the rest of the team because we're the ones that are picking up the last minute changes. And it doesn't work in our
Mm,
life. Like your timeline isn't always our timeline. So please don't change things last minute. I need to notice by Tuesday if you're going to need a change by Friday. And I
mhm,
had this moment of, ooh, that was uncomfortable. I got a boundary set. And on the one hand, I had that feeling. On the other hand, I had this gratitude for having the boundary set. Like it's uncomfortable, but it's going to make me a better team member. And I think
mhm,
that sometimes we think if we are making someone uncomfortable by setting a boundary, then it's not good or it's not healthy or it's harming them. And that can block us from doing it. Or if we feel uncomfortable in getting a boundary set on us, we think, oh, that person is mean, as opposed to this is part of the discomfort of living is we need
mhm.
walls to keep our noise inside rooms and we need you know street rules and all sorts of things. But I'd love for you to talk about the discomfort in boundary setting because I feel like that's one of the biggest blocks that people have to giving boundaries and receiving them.
As you were speaking, I was thinking about some jobs I've had in the past where you have to tell people boundaries. I remember I worked at a detox facility, and they had like a certain amount of smoke breaks they could have. And if, by the end of the day, they would want more smoke breaks. And so you would have to say to the residents, oh no, this was the last one. And boy, oh boy, did I learn a lesson in being cussed out. Now, this was the rule. It wasn't my rule, but it was certainly the rule of the facility. And I didn't say it in any mean way. It was posted. People knew it when they checked in. But when it was told to them, it was like, oh no, I can't believe you're telling me the rule.
Hmm.
It was like, what are you doing? Um, and I often thought, it must be really hard to not get what you want,
Right.
especially as you're detoxing and you're already uncomfortable and you really want a cigarette, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's hard to listen to boundaries. Even if you know them ahead of time, that's why it's always important to repeat it. We would tell people as they checked in, we would remind them 5 more smoke breaks, 4 more smoke breaks. None of it helped. When people don't want to listen to it or they don't want to receive that information, they don't. That's really hard for us to accept because we're like, am I saying it wrong? What am I doing? And it's like, no, you've done everything right. I hear you. Other people hear you. They don't want to hear you. It's unfortunate, but that is sometimes the case. And a part of being human is dealing with the discomfort of people not always liking what we have to say. There's no way to get around that. There is no possible way to say everything and people like it. Not the president, not anyone. It's not possible. There is going to be division among, yeah, that was great. That was terrible. There will be someone who says, I don't like the way you said that. And it is uncomfortable. When I feel uncomfortable around having difficult conversations, what I typically do is ramp up the self nurturing. Who can I call after this hard talk so I can process my feelings? What do I need to write about in my journal? How long will my bath be tonight? Do I need to take myself out and grab my favorite takeout? What things do I need to do to really nurture myself after this difficult encounter? Because I will have them. There's no way to get out of it. I feel better. I've set some really tough boundaries. I felt terrible and saying, I'm like, oh, this is going to change stuff. But afterwards, there was such a relief of that needed to be said.
Yeah. It's one thing to set the smoke break for the detox center and then go home and be, "Oh, I'm done with it." It's harder when that you're setting that boundary and the smoker is in your house and you're like, "You cannot smoke in the house." I mean, I've worked with clients who have to set boundaries with their partners, have to set boundaries with their parents. I mean, this is a very common experience as a
Hmm.
therapist. This is what we do all day long is help people have their voice to set the boundary and then tolerate the distress of the boundary. But I think in family dynamics, it's particularly challenging to do that. I mean, it can be, people can be willing to stay in a marriage or a relationship for years because they're unwilling to disappoint or upset or hurt their partner, and they think that that's
Hmm.
actually the softer, kinder way of doing things. But in the long run, just like like keeping the smoke breaks to 3, there's a reason why you did that in the treatment center because you don't want people smoking all day if they're detoxing, it's not good for them. And there's also a reason why we need to set boundaries in our families that actually is healthier for the whole system. So can we talk a little bit about family relationships and boundary setting with parents or boundary setting with partners, and what are some of the common blocks that you see around that?
With partners and parents, there's an assumption that they won't listen to us. They won't listen to me if I tell them this. And to me, that is our role as being the child. We haven't transitioned into being an adult in those relationships. It is our role of maybe being a bit more timid in our relationships when in actuality, we know that one huge cause of divorce is the lack of communication. One huge cause of family problems is the lack of communication. Boundaries is simply a way to communicate with people. It's a way to save your relationships, a way to be more connected to people. So yes, you may say something that is tough or challenging, but the overall goal is to connect more, not less. When we are requesting something of a partner or we're setting an expectation, we're doing so with the intention of staying in the relationship in many cases, trying to make things work at least for me, if not the both of us. And it's so important that we don't look at boundaries as divisive tactics because that's not the intention. The intention is to preserve, restore, and protect.
I love that. That's so good. I mean, it makes me think about turned everything into these open workspaces where everyone
Mm.
was sort of in the open workspace and nobody had privacy
Mhm.
anymore. And what they started to see was that actually innovation went down, not up, because people are more likely to experiment when they have some walls around and they're in private. They're like trying something out, sort of like you practice your speech in the shower when nobody's listening. And
Mhm.
as soon as we eliminated these like physical boundaries, we saw that we need open spaces, but that we also need closed spaces. And the same is true within our families. I love this concept of boundaries are actually what enable us to keep the relationship. They're not about
Mhm.
ending relationships.
Yeah, I think, the final boundary is like this is done. Anything before that is a preservation tactic. It's really like I'm trying to be in this with you, so please don't smoke in the house. I'm trying to be in this with you, so please arrive on time. I'm trying to be in this with you, so please don't gossip about me to other family members. I am trying to stay in this. That's why I'm setting the boundary. I'm not setting the boundary as a way to leave. I'm setting the boundary as a way to stay.